living are not done with you yet.
When you're dealing with supervillains, you have to create a supervillain jail, right? I mean, otherwise, it's just weird to throw them in some normal jail somewhere else. The latest episode of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier saw Zemo being hauled off to a special prison called the Raft. And this isn't the first time we've seen this prison in the MCU. What exactly is it, and how could this lead to more stories for Zemo? And just who exactly will Zemo be bunking with? Let's get into it right now. How long after supervillains started showing up that the government decided to build the Raft? I mean, it makes sense, right? When you have these larger-than-life villains, it's sometimes not feasible to just stick them in any old prison somewhere because that's a recipe for disaster. And the Raft is about as secure as you can get for a prison. It's an underwater prison that was specifically created to house and detain people with powers. The strangest, most ironic thing though is that we haven't exactly seen a lot of supervillains housed there. We first got a look at the Raft in Captain America: Civil War, where the Raft was used to detain the Avengers who sided with Captain America. That means Sam Wilson, Clint Barton, Wanda Maximoff, and Scott Lang all were locked up there. I mean, I get wanting to have all your Avengers under lock and key and under surveillance, and you can't just throw them in any old prison, but seriously, don't you think that was a little harsh for 3 out of 4 of those individuals? Sam and Clint are well trained, but they're not enhanced individuals, and Scott has a super powerful suit, but under that suit, he's just a guy who's good at close-up magic. And sure, maybe the government was afraid of Scott's Sorcerer Supreme-like abilities at this point, so they wanted to lock him away, but guys, obviously he didn't start training and honing his godlike powers until he was put on house arrest. I'm kidding, of course, but it's just unfortunate that group was there. Wanda, on the other hand? Yeah, this is the type of location that's built to contain her, but we're just lucky she wasn't as grief-stricken yet and turned the whole Raft into a sitcom. Though that does sound awesome. Anyways, the Raft is a legit supervillain prison, and I guess any major supervillain with enhanced powers who's still alive at the end of their movies would go here. You know, as long as you weren't a Spider-Man villain, I guess. But what's fun is that Civil War isn't our only mention of the Raft. It was actually used heavily in the Netflix Marvel TV shows. Luke Cage mentions that he sent his half-brother to the Raft. And then in Jessica Jones, when Trish Walker turns to the dark side, she's eventually sent to the Raft as well. Now, because those shows were canceled and are very iffy on whether they're actually part of our MCU, we'll most likely never see this resolution. But it looked like the Netflix shows were setting up some type of villain gathering at the Raft. That would have been cool to see, don't you think? So with the Raft slowly gaining more and more prominence in the MCU, what can we expect to see from the super prison going forward? Is it just going to be a place to put expensive guest actors who need to be kept out of sight until they're needed again? Or could we be setting up something bigger? Well, there's a few comic options here. One fun storyline in the comics is that Otto Octavius, in the body of Peter Parker at this point, blackmails J. Jonah Jameson and gets full ownership of the Raft facility. No longer a prison, the Dr. Octopus Spider-Man turns it into his own personal headquarters and renames it Spider Island 2. Now, I know this is impossible, but how about an adaptation of that where Tom Holland's Peter is suddenly given ownership of the Raft? Think of the shenanigans that would ensue. Okay, fine. While that's not likely, there is another more feasible possibility. In the comics, the Thunderbolts program is mainly run from this facility, which allows criminals to go on missions for the government to reduce their sentences. They must have watched Suicide Squad. Anyway, the Thunderbolts have been heavily rumored for the MCU for a long time now, and with the reintroduction of the Raft, could this be laying the groundwork for an official MCU supervillain team partly based on Raft prisoners? Maybe. Because should we read anything into Zemo being transported to the Raft at the end of episode 5 of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier? Right now, that seems like a tremendously odd choice. So he started off the series in a pretty normal government jail, and he was just a super smart dude who hated super soldiers. And then Bucky broke him out of jail, faced no repercussions, and then Zemo became almost buddy-buddy with Sam and Bucky. Then the Wakandans showed up demanding he be handed over, which made a lot of sense. Zemo was responsible for the death of King T'Chaka, so it would make sense that since Zemo was out, the Wakandans would want to bring him back to Wakanda to answer for his crimes. But then Io mentions that they're bringing him to be imprisoned at the Raft. Isn't that strange? Why would the Wakandans show up to basically bring Zemo to another US-operated prison, this time for supervillains? Shouldn't he go back to where he was? He only was able to escape from there because of Bucky, so what warrants him being sent to the Raft? One of the only things I can think of is that the MCU isn't done with Zemo. As it stands, if episode 5 is the last we saw of Zemo, then that's kind of a lackluster conclusion to his character. Part of me first thought a few episodes ago that Zemo would be transferred to Wakanda to have a part in Black Panther 2, but that seems unlikely now. So again, why the Raft? Going back to the comics, could we possibly be setting up his inclusion in the Thunderbolts? I mean, he did lead a version of the Thunderbolts in the comics, and, as I mentioned, the Raft is a big central point for the Thunderbolts. That's just too big of a coincidence, right? I certainly think so. How long do you think it would take someone like Rocket Raccoon to escape the Raft? Could he even do it? It's supposed to be a highly secure facility, but then again, never count out Rocket. Now there's an MCU moment I want to see.